Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to cover all the costs that it took to take my yard from this to this. So with that, let's get right into it. Before jumping into all the out-of-pocket expenses that I had, it would be naive to think that I wasn't also starting with a number of the tools that I needed. And if you're also planning to do something like this on your own, these are things that you would have to factor in if you did not already own them. And keep in mind, I do a lot of DIY projects and renovations. I've accumulated these over a number of years. So if you're just getting started, don't feel like you have to go out and buy everything at once. That's a really unrealistic standard, and I want to assure you that is absolutely not what I did here. So with that, here's everything I already had or was able to borrow free of cost from somebody I knew. Starting with hearing protection, a pair of protective gloves, safety glasses, a sledgehammer, and 2 wheelbarrows. I also had a wooden ramp that allowed me to get the wheelbarrow up onto the trailers to dump the dirt and debris there, as well as helping me get the gravel up to the higher tiers of my retaining wall later in the project. To do a lot of the woodworking, including building the trailer, I also had a number of my woodworking tools. That included a number of tape measures, pencils and Sharpies to mark things, an impact gun, ratchets and a breaker bar, sockets, a cordless drill, drill bits, wood screws, a workbench that I had made with a couple of sawhorses, and then a number of saws, including a table saw, a miter saw, 2 circular saws, and a reciprocating saw. To power all this, I had a number of extension cords and power strips. Then I also had other various tools like a utility knife, wood clamps, an orbital sander, an air compressor, a 3-ton car jack for my automotive projects, an angle grinder, speed squares, a number of other hammers, especially a demolition hammer, my lawnmower and weed whacker, also known as a string trimmer, as well as other screwdrivers and a chisel and punch set. I also had a number of materials that I either had left over from prior projects or that were left here from the previous owner when I first purchased this house. That included roughly 7 to 10 2x4s that I made into the hoist for the rock, as well as the concrete mold and a few other things that I did with those. I also had a 4x8 foot sheet of 1/4-inch plywood that was used for the concrete mold, as well as a 4x8 foot sheet of oriented strand board, and I used that mostly as a backer when I was doing the gravel filling. Finally, I had a number of 2x2s left over. I mostly used those when I was installing the fence, but I also used scrap pieces during other parts of the project. Moving on next to the garden tools, I had a flathead transfer shovel, I had a number of garden shovels, as well as a hand shovel. I was able to borrow an electronic jackhammer free of cost, and I was previously given an engine hoist by my dad, mostly because it's huge and he didn't want to store it. I was also able to borrow a chainsaw when I was removing most of the invasive shrubs in my yard. The pressure washer and hose are 2 things that I've owned from previous projects, as was the caulking gun that I used to seal up this concrete mold. All the spare bricks that I had were also left behind by the previous owner, but these other items, including the bucket, the drill mixer attachment, and the coarse brush with wood handle, are leftovers from a prior project. The newspaper and cardboard I already had laying around, but the paint sprayer I was actually given for free, but it did need a little fine tuning to actually make it work. The spray bottle that I used to get stain on the inside of the fence pickets was something I had laying around, and I also had the staple gun as well as a number of staples on hand. Finally, I already had a garden rake, but I was also able to borrow this massive grading rake, which really helped to level out the yard, as well as this hand tamp that I used for not only leveling the yard, but also compacting the gravel base. And finally, because this project went several years and it also went deep into the winter at some point, I had a propane heater that I used to heat my garage, as well as a number of working lights that I used to work not only in the garage, but also outside at night. So that covers everything that I already owned or was able to borrow for this project. Now let's move into everything that I had to pay for out of pocket. And for each of these, I've got the breakdown of not only the individual cost of each item, but also the total cost for each category. So let's start at the very beginning, which is the work that took place before I even was running the camera, where I had to mark out the initial path of the retaining wall and the excavation, so that way DigSafe could come out and make sure it was safe to dig in these areas. I had to buy a 100 pack of white flags that was $7.97. I bought 200 feet of orange line that was $4.97. And finally, I bought a plumb bob for $5.97. That was going to make sure my line was straight when I was actually doing the vertical run of these walls, as well as making sure my estimates were perfectly vertical when I was trying to initially price materials. The total between these 3 was $18.91. Then after the first summer of this project, I realized that nobody wanted to come here and physically pick up the dirt and haul it off on their own, so I ended up buying a trailer that I could use to drop off the dirt and dispose of it. Now, it could be very easily argued that this should not be included because, quite frankly, I ended up eventually eventually paying an excavation company anyhow, and ultimately I did charge money for the dirt that I dropped off, which made this trailer fully pay for itself after the first year. But in my opinion, it did make this project a lot easier, not only for removing a lot of the debris, but also for disposing of the yard waste afterwards, and for getting a lot of the bulky materials such as the concrete and the rebar. So for that reason, I will still include the full cost of the trailer build as well as the other accessories. Starting with the trailer itself, this was a used Harbor Freight trailer, and I paid $250 on Facebook Marketplace, and that included a trailer dolly, 2 spare wheels, and a spare light kit, among a few other accessories. And next were the costs for the materials to build out this trailer for what I needed it to be for this project, and this total came out to $285.21. That included $9.49 of socket head screws. I had 2 sheets of 4-foot by 8-foot plywood that was prior to COVID, so that was $52.36 in total. I purchased a box of 3/8 hex nuts at $3.56, a 100-pack of 3/8 inch fender washers at $26.10, a pack of 2-inch long 3/8 inch bolts at $9.22. I bought 3 4-packs of 4-inch galvanized corner braces, so 12 total corner braces at a price of $23.46. The trailer stake pockets, which held up the vertical walls on the side, I bought 8 of those at a total cost of $47.20. I bought 1 8-foot length of 4x4 inch pressure treated lumber that was $7.98. And then to attach that to the rear bumper of the trailer, I bought 5-inch long 3/8 inch bolts. I purchased 6 of those at a total cost of $10.62. I also bought a 20-pack of assorted pins that was $9.99 to hold on the rear tailgate, and a hand crank truck bed unloader that I used to unload all of the materials to save my back, which was worth its weight in gold at a mere $56.24. I also bought a 4-pack of 4-inch caster wheels so that I could fold up this trailer for storage in the winter. That was $28.99. So totaling up the total cost of the trailer itself with all the materials to build it, that was $535.21, bringing our total running cost to $554.12. And in the video where I initially outfitted this trailer, which I'll link in the description below, the total came out to $407. The reason for the difference there is because I did make some modifications and I did change out the decking at some point in this project. So let's price out some of the other trailer accessories that I had to purchase, which weren't necessarily linked to the cost of the trailer build itself. I bought 2 2-packs of cargo D-rings. Those were to help hold the tarps down over the top. That was at a total cost of $5.98. I bought a 4-pack of 15-foot ratchet straps for $19.95, 3 8-foot by 10-foot blue tarps for $18.57, a trailer light tester for $6.29. Then I had to purchase wiring harnesses for my old Subaru Forester as well as my Porsche Cayenne when I eventually bought that partway through this project. The Forester wiring harness was a direct plug-in to the OEM harness at $34.39, and the full trailer hitch install for the Cayenne, I have a video on that I will link in the description below. The total for the hitch itself and the wiring harness to get everything set up was $299.99, which brings the total for these other trailer accessories to $385.17 out of pocket over the course of this project. That brings our running total to $939.29. But keep in mind, $920.38 of that was just to build out this trailer and to be able to tow it. Bringing us to our next 2 expenses, which were waste disposal and excavation of the yard. Before I had a place that I could tow all of the concrete cinder blocks because nobody seemed to want them, I first tried to take them to the local dump, which charges by the pound for disposal. The first trailer load was about 1,100 pounds. It cost $89.25 to dispose of, bringing our running total to $1,028.54. Then I did the math on what the total cost would be to dispose of all the cinder blocks I had, and I realized that economically it was not going to make sense to do that, so I ended up hiring the excavation company who could not only take those away, but also complete the rest of the excavation for this yard. Furthermore, that was going to save me at least a year of trying to get rid of all of this dirt just because of the time that it took to drive and drop off every single load. The reason I didn't start with that is the initial quotes I had were in the realm of $19,000, but I eventually shopped around for about 6 months and found a company who would do it for $3,500, bringing our running total to $4,528.54. Having gladly outsourced that, I had to buy new tools to start working on the rest of this project, starting with a 29-inch pair of bypass loppers, also known as a really big pair of garden shears, for $19.97. Then I purchased 2 separate digging shovels for a total cost of $37.96. I bought 2 3-inch industrial PLC clamps that were a total of $4, a 12-inch combo square for $10.97, and 2 quick release bar clamps for $6.38. I purchased a 24-inch Stanley level for $11.97, 3 quick links that were 5/16 inch for $7.65, and a 5/16 grab hook for $6.65. And those were to help me operate the 20-foot 5/16 inch tow chain with hooks that I purchased for $36.97 to help remove some of the rocks. I also purchased an 18-inch by 12¼ inch wood dolly for $10.99 and an 8-ton hydraulic cylinder with an air jack attachment for $99.99. I also needed an air connection quick coupler that I bought for that for $3.99. And the next things I purchased were a Ryobi hammer drill for $69.97, a 9-inch torpedo level for $3.97, a 12-inch by 4-inch wide finishing trowel for $14.27, a bow rake for $19.98, a new wheelbarrow for $89, and a Scott's seed spreader for $89.98. The total spent on all of this tooling was $544.66, though I do get to keep these and reuse these on future projects, bringing our running total to $5,073.20. The next category is bits and blades because realistically these all got consumed and I can't really reuse these. Starting with 6 different blades for my angle grinder, including a 4-inch metal cutoff blade and 4 4.5-inch metal cutoff blades at a total of $549 and $1588 respectively. And I purchased a 4.5-inch turbo diamond blade to cut into some of the concrete and stone at a price of $10.97, meaning I spent a total of $32.34 on blades for the angle grinder. And for the reciprocating saw, I bought a total of 4 12-inch pruning blades. The first one was $11.97, then the price went up for the other 3 at $12.97 each, bringing the total for those 4 to $50.88. I also bought 4 other 12-inch blades that were cheaper because I knew I was going to be ruining them in the dirt at an additional cost of $13.16, meaning I spent a total of $64.04 on blades for the reciprocating saw. Then for my other saws, I spent $19.97 on a 20-piece jigsaw blade set and $21.47 for a 7¼ inch fine-tooth saw blade for some of the finish cuts. The total between the two of those was $41.44 on saw blades, bringing us to our final consumable of drill bits, and I went through a lot of those. I bought 5 different 1/2-inch thick, 18-inch long carbide hammer drill bits at a total cost of $76, as well as a 1/2-inch by 16-inch Speed Demon spade bit to go through the wood at $10.27, bringing the total cost for all drill bits to $86.27. Across all of the blades and bits that I purchased for this project, it was $224.09, bringing the running total cost to $5,297.29. Next, let's consider some of the safety equipment that I had to purchase that I didn't already have on hand. Starting with valved respirators, I bought 2 of them for a total of $7.94 to keep some of the dust out of my lungs. And while I already started with 1 pair of protective gloves, a lot of this yard work, specifically working with all the gravel and the dirt, trying to move that around, that was absolutely brutal on the gloves that I had, and I ended up buying 6 different pairs at a total cost of $99.99. As I said, I already had things like safety glasses and a respirator from when I was doing the spray painting on hand. Even so, I spent $107.93 on this additional safety equipment, bringing my total to $5,405.22. Next on the list is the concrete foundation. Starting with the concrete mix itself, I bought 15 60-pound bags, which is 900 total pounds of concrete mix. I believe I ended up with 2 bags total left over, but even so, the total cost for the 15 bags was $59.70, and the extra roughly $8 I spent on those 2 bags was well worth not having the risk of running out mid-project and having to run to the store while covered in concrete. Then when making the concrete mold, I predominantly tried to use scrap wood, but I ended up using about $15 total of new wood and 3 tubes of caulk to seal that concrete mold at the base at a total cost of $10.74. I also bought a 12-ounce can of WD-40 that I used as a mold release so that I wouldn't have as much trouble removing the mold from the concrete after it had dried. That was $9.49, and I bought an industrial size roll of cling wrap to cover this up while it was drying on Amazon for $16.74. So for everything to make the concrete foundation except for the rebar, which I'm going to factor in later, it brought the total for this foundation to $111.67, and the project grand total to $5,516.89. Now let's look at the cost to build the retaining wall itself, starting with the 6x6 lumber with delivery charge. That was a total of $2,291.91, mostly because I got a bulk quantity discount. Next, I purchased 10 pieces of 10-foot long 1/2-inch No. 4 rebar to stake these into the ground as well as for the concrete mold, and I probably have 2 or 3 of these still left over, but that was a total cost of $69.70. And finally, I purchased a 250 pack of the 10-inch long structural screws that are used to hold those different rows of the retaining wall together. That was a total cost of $189, bringing the total cost of materials for the wall itself to $2,550.65. The running total at this point being $8,067.54. Next was the cost for all of the drainage, as well as the gravel mulch and any of the landscaping that was associated with it. Starting, of course, with the 15 cubic yards of 3/4 inch crushed stone. This is roughly 40,000 pounds of gravel. That was $510 plus a $60 delivery fee to have it dropped off for a total price of $570. Next is the landscape fabric that we used behind the gravel drainage to keep out all the sand, as well as below the gravel mulch to block all of the weeds. I bought 3 rolls, which were 4 foot by 200 foot long. The first 2 cost $54.98 each, and the last one was $56.98. So I spent a total of $166.94 on landscape fabric. Next were the fabric staples that held these into the back wall while I was still adding the gravel. I bought 2 separate 75 packs at $14.47 each for a total price of $28.94. And then the landscape edging, I bought 4 total rolls that were 60 foot long each. The first 2 were $31.98 and the second 2 were $37.97 each, bringing the total price for the edging to $139.90. The grand total for all of this gravel mulch and drainage was $905.78, bringing the total for the project to $8,973.32. And next, let's look at the cost for the new section of fencing that I put up on the side of my house. The 2 fence posts were made from the 6x6s that I used to build the wall. I did factor that into the price earlier. And the rough sawn fence section, which was 6 feet tall and 8 feet wide, was $57.98. And finally, something I actually didn't show in any of the videos, I bought an additional 10 6-foot tall pickets, and these were used to close up the gaps in all of the other fences around the yard so that my dogs couldn't escape. Those 10 pickets totaled $19.90. Finally, I had the hardware kit for the gate, which included the self-closing hinge as well as the latch. That was $24.98, bringing the total for the fence sections to $102.86, and the total for the yard to $9,076.18. And while that is the bulk of the material cost, there's also some other things that I hadn't necessarily considered, such as the cost of my lawn equipment. This included not only the removal and disposal of a lot of those invasive shrubs, but also the additional maintenance of my yard equipment because of this additional wear. So let's start out with the lawn bags. I used a total of 11 5-packs, which is 55 total yard bags, and that cost $27.65 to get rid of all the weeds and other debris. I also purchased a 5-gallon easy pour gas can so that I could actually fuel most of my equipment. That was $33.44, and a 32-ounce can of fuel stabilizer at $14.49. I also went through 6 cans in total of premixed fuel at various sizes, using both 40-to-1 and 50-to-1 for the string trimmer and the chainsaw. That was a total of $72.84 on fuel, not including any gas for the lawnmower. And finally, for equipment maintenance, I started with the hand-me-down string trimmer, which was gas-powered. I purchased a new carburetor and a tune-up kit for that for $18.99, but that was a sunk cost because I ultimately realized it had no compression and I had to buy a new one, which I'm not including here. Other things I had to purchase was a new solenoid for $10.50, engine oil at $8.98, a new mower blade at $19.92, and a reel of string trimmer line for $19.97, spending a total of $78.36 to maintain my equipment. That brought my lawn care total cost to $226.78, and the running total for the project to $9,302.96. And let's move on to one of the final costs for the build itself, which is the stain and the finish work. First thing I purchased was a 4-inch foam roller to do a lot of the staining at $4.97, as well as a 4-inch flat brush at $3.97, and a roll of 1-inch painter's tape also at $3.97. I used a gallon of either acetone or mineral spirits to thin out the stain when I was spraying it. That was $19.97, and I used 2 gallons of the dark mahogany stain. The first one cost $28.99, and the second one, purchased only 3 months later, was $42.98. That second gallon accounted for almost half of the $104.85 that I spent to stain and finish all of the wood, and it brings the project total to $9,407.81. But unfortunately, that's still not the total for this project because there's a number of other costs that I had that I really didn't expect and didn't fit into any of these other categories. categories, starting with a can of Spectricide, Wasp, and Hornet Killer because especially when I was doing the concrete and pouring all the water, that attracted specifically a number of mud wasps and I did get stung, making it worth every single penny of the $3.27. Next, I got a 3-outlet extension cord so that I didn't have to run separate extension cords for each power tool. That was $30.31, as well as a shorter 10-foot extension cord because my other extension cord was more of a hassle being much longer, and that was $12.31. Next, I bought a 2-pack of surge protectors costing $19.99. And next on the list, which was a total sunken cost, I bought 2 new wheelbarrow handles for $33.96. I have a whole other video on this that I'll link in the description below, but I bought those 2 handles thinking that I could repair my old wheelbarrow before buying the new one, only to find out that they were in such disrepair that I actually would have spent more repairing those than just buying the new one in the first place, making the $33.96 spent for those 2 handles a complete loss. The next thing on the list was a 9-foot power tool cord for $14.47, and that was used to repair the reciprocating saw, which I actually got for free because it was not working because the old power cord had failed. I also spent $31.95 on a 32-ounce can of Brush Tox, which is a very potent brush killer. That was the only thing I found that was able to kill one of the really invasive plants in my yard, and I also bought a 1-gallon pump sprayer for $9.97 that I used to apply it. And once this project was completed, I tried to buy new seed to replant the grass. I ended up buying a 43-pound bag of turf builder. That was $48.97, and I also bought 20 pounds of grass seed for $89.97. Finally, I spent $5.28 for some Loctite super glue that was used throughout this project, and I will attribute 1 propane tank refill to this project that I used to heat my garage later in the season at a cost of $20.98, meaning the total for all these miscellaneous expenses was $321.43. And with that being the last category, the grand total of out-of-pocket expenses for this entire project was $9,729.24. If you were to exclude all the costs related to the trailer because ultimately it was not necessary for this project, that alone would lower the total to $8,719.61, meaning that cost alone accounted for almost 10% of the full price of this project. I want to keep a couple things in mind here is that I knew that this project was going to have to be done before I bought the house, and I did factor that into the purchase cost. But in addition to that, this project was 4 years long in total, so all of this wasn't incurred at once, it was spread out over that time. Even so, I only thought I had spent about $7,000 total on this project, which was clearly a miscalculation on my part. And I think it really goes to show that over the scope of a major project like this, how some of those smaller costs can really snowball into a considerable amount. Because if you took the cost of just the excavation, the wall build, and all the gravel drainage, including landscape edging and the fabric, those 3 items alone were $6,956.43. But even though doing it myself cost me more than I expected, it still saved me so much compared to what it would have cost to have somebody else do it for me. So tune in next time as I cover all the estimates I was given for this exact same work, as well as the total amount of money that I saved doing this myself. And let me know in the comments below if you think it was worth it for me to do all of this on my own, or if you think I'm a complete idiot for even considering to attempt this in the first place. Thank you for watching.